I just wrapped up some cut tests. I've decided that I'm going to batch all my cut tests, so I'll do like 3, 4, 5 swords, doing cut tests, recording all of it, and then I'll edit those into the proper reviews in the future. I've heard many people in the comments saying they would like to see cut tests as part of the reviews. I actually took them out because I didn't think they were all that interesting, but apparently my audience does, so I'm more than happy to oblige and get those back into the reviews. But taking the break from it and speaking to something that I actually recorded a video on uh, about 3 weeks ago, and I didn't end up posting it. I didn't really even edit it because at the time it was a little bit too soon after some of the events, and I thought the topic was interesting and something that I wanted to cover. It's rather broad, but I think now that it's been more than a month, I'm more comfortable speaking about it as not such a hot topic, but something more that looks at what goes into sword collecting and really the purpose behind a sword. So the event I'm actually talking about is the attack that happened in Sweden about a month ago, where someone entered a high school with what was essentially a katana, and ended up killing 2 people. And with that tragedy kind of behind us, I want to underscore that is not ever an acceptable thing to do, obviously, and that it was a very sad thing. But I feel like it's something that I need to speak to as a sword collector, to really speak towards why I collect swords and what they're for. And then also speak a little bit towards some of the concepts behind not just the medieval thought process, but really even a modern day thought process of what constitutes a weapon, and what that really means. And so I'll speak to some of those things. But first off, I just wanted to speak to why I collect swords and what a sword is to me, and how what we saw in Sweden was really an abuse of a sword, and not its correct usage anymore. I think most modern people, most civilized people will tell you a sword is not really meant to be a weapon of war anymore. And really, I don't even really view a sword as a weapon of violence in the modern age. It's something that we can look at historically, and we can look at and appreciate both in an artistic form as well as a martial form. But ultimately, it's a piece of history and really has no place in the modern age as a weapon of death. And I think that is really sad that it was used that way, because it ends up casting most people like myself and those in the community of people who like swords and collect them and appreciate them. It casts us in a little bit of a negative light. So I wanted to speak a little bit towards why I collect swords. I have a very, very strong interest in medieval history, and a huge portion of medieval history was ruled by the sword. In fact, the entirety of the medieval history, or the medieval period, was an era of swords. And I believe that they represent, obviously, a tool that was meant to kill, but they also represent a little bit of art. And one of the reasons I collect is actually for the appreciation of the artistic endeavors that go into creating a sword. Now, as a practitioner of HEMA, I additionally like to practice it from kind of a historical archaeology, historical recreation standpoint, to understand how it was actually properly used as a weapon of war. And I believe that this is a scholastic endeavor as much as it is a physical endeavor. And that ultimately my purpose of learning this thing is not to go out and do bodily harm to anyone. In fact, that's really never my desire. I don't want to hurt anybody. And I think that it takes a very evil person to actually ever really have that desire, and to want to use something as personal as a sword in an attack. But it's my appreciation of the history and what it is meant to humankind, again, not just as a weapon of war, but as a piece of art and what it actually represents, that really draws me to it. And the ideas of the violence behind it from a historical standpoint, I get that. And to some extent, I even want to participate in that in a safe way. But ultimately, my reason for collecting swords is not to hurt people. It's to appreciate it. And that's going to kind of drive into the next topic, because we've seen again in the modern age, we're seeing a lot of cases of bladed weapons being used. I will speak only a little bit to ISIS because I don't really want to talk about them. But we've also seen attacks that have happened, such as knife attacks that have happened in Jordan and in Israel, where people have basically used kitchen knives to attack other people. And that drives this topic, because in the Middle Ages, and really at any time throughout the course of human history, anything and everything has been used as a weapon. I bring up the case in Jordan because the purpose of a kitchen knife is to cut food and to prepare food, but it was used for violence. And in those areas, the supermarkets actually pulled those things off their shelves and didn't sell them to people without some sort of identification. Much like here in the United States, you have to be a certain age to buy spray paint because of graffiti. And they restrict sales of these things in order to hopefully dissuade people from using it for violent purposes. The problem is that if it's not a knife, it's just something else. You can use anything. You can use stones, you can use sticks, you can use whatever you want to hurt someone. And throughout human history, we have seen that. And this comes to light a lot with gun collectors, and especially in the United States, with groups like the NRA, who have guns, and they collect guns, and they buy guns, and they use guns, and they do actually have some intent for self-defense with them. But for the most part, the gun is just a tool, and it's really the person who does the physical harm. And if it's not a gun, it's a knife, and if it's not a knife, it's a club, and if it's not a club, it's their bare hands or a piece of rope, right? It's whatever someone can get their hands on. And we see this actually reflected, historically speaking, in something like Talhofer's Fecht book, specifically Folio 77R, 77R. You can actually see where a hat is used as a piece of an attacking method or way of either defense or offense. Something as simple as a hat, and it's kind of funny because I think about the James Bond movies with Oddjob, throwing a hat, or even the Austin Powers movie with throwing a shoe. Ultimately, anything can be used, and I think that's important to underscore, bringing it back around to the idea of a sword, that, again, yes, this could be used, but if it's not this that's used in a horrific event like what happened in Sweden, it's just going to be something else. And I bring that up because there has been some concern, especially in the European front right now, that there's going to be kind of a restriction on these things. And I think that's the wrong approach for government to take. I think the United States is pretty liberal in terms of how they allow people to own weapons. And I actually don't mind that, because for the most part, everyone is law-abiding, and they're going to keep people safe, and they're going to use it properly. But when a government restricts it, all they really do is they just change the mind of the criminal or the person who has ill intent to just go use something else that is available. And so it's kind of a weird topic because it's not something I normally want to cover, and I really like instead thinking about swords from their aesthetic and their functional standpoint, understanding how this was used and appreciating it for what it is. But I think in this day and age, we're going to see more and more incidences that are going to call people within my specific field of interest and within the community of sword collectors into question, because they're going to say, well, you're collecting weapons, what are you planning on doing with them? And I think it's really important that we make the we take the stance right now, and we make the statement that our intent is to appreciate our history, and our intent is to appreciate the artistic and the craftsman effort that goes into making something like this properly. So I wanted to just kind of do a quick video on that. It's kind of a weird topic. It's not one that I really wanted to do, but I feel like it's really necessary to say. And ultimately, I hope that we don't see things such as swords used in modern violence anymore. And I really hope eventually we just see violence go away altogether. But I know that will never happen. It's human nature, unfortunately, to do very, very terrible things to one another. So ultimately, let's as sword collectors kind of come together as a community and say, our purpose for these things is something noble and not something that is meant to be damaging to other people.